This happened back in 2013. I live in the UK and I was 15 years old at the time. It was around mid-May when my grandfather, who was 82 years of age, sadly passed away due to several health issues. He was a cherished and respected man who many of us miss to this day. As my family and I are Hindu, we deal with death in our religion differently than most. It starts with a mourning period that lasts up to 13 days. Within that time, the family will come and pay their respects at the deceased's house. We would celebrate the life of the departed and say prayers to allow them to move on in peace. I'm not entirely religious myself, but I will follow these traditions to honor my grandfather. During the mourning period, my mother would drive me and my sister to my grandparents' house every day after school. Most of my family would always be there during this time, so the house was usually pretty full. Back then I had some upcoming exams, and always made sure to bring my school material, which my mom encouraged me to do. Everyone would usually be downstairs either in the front room, the living room, or the kitchen. I went upstairs to one of the bedrooms to study alone. I remember shutting the door to mute the noise from downstairs and began studying for my exam. I was about half an hour into my studies when I heard a light tapping at the door. Because the door had no lock on it, I just assumed it was one of my younger cousins trying to annoy me, so I shrugged it off. About 10 seconds after that, the door handle began to shake up and down, like someone was trying to get into the room. I froze in complete horror because I didn't know who or what was on the other side, and was trying to anticipate what would happen next. Suddenly the noise stopped. I waited 5 seconds before deciding to open the door. Nobody was there. I didn't see anyone running down the staircase laughing. I went into my grandma's room and nobody was in there either. I decided that it must have been my younger cousins, but when I went to go find them, they were in the front room playing with their toys beside my uncle's. I asked a couple of people if they had come upstairs at any point, and they all said no, which kind of creeped me out. I told my mom and grandma about it, and to my surprise, they told me that a similar thing happened to them a day or two ago. My grandparents have this cellar in the living room where they keep pots and pans. They all heard crashing sounds coming from down there, and when they went to go look, some of the pots and pans had fallen from the shelves, so naturally they were put back. But a few minutes later, they heard a crashing sound again, only to find the same pots and pans on the floor. My mom told me that it was probably my grandfather letting us know that he was still around. This made me wonder if he in some way tried to open the door upstairs while I was studying. My grandfather was known to be a prankster, which made sense to me. I did have some belief in the paranormal, and this only increased it further. After the peaceful cremation service and the final feast, no other strange events happened again. It was scary at the time, and it's still kind of creepy thinking back to it now, but in a way, it was nice feeling to know that my grandfather was still there, and I can only hope now that he has found peace. Back in 2007-2008, I was a teenager. There was this old abandoned house that sat in a park that was close to my hometown. My friends and I would pass by this old house many times, but never really gave it much thought. That was until the day we decided to have a closer look. It looked like any other residential house from the outside, except it stood alone in the middle of the park. There was a stone wall that surrounded the property, which we had little difficulty scaling. Once on the other side, we navigated through the thick undergrowth of shrubs until we eventually reached the front door. We removed 3 boards that were tacked on the front door, and then cautiously entered the house. Inside was completely empty. There was no furniture, no pictures, nothing. We then explored upstairs. When we got to the second floor, we were faced with 4 doors lining a hallway, each locked with not 1, not 2, but 3 sliding bolt locks. Glancing at each other, we selected the nearest door and began unlocking the bolts. Inside the rooms were these metal beds that looked like something straight out of an old asylum. Each room also had an armchair and a wardrobe.
What is this place?
My friend asked. I don't know, but why would they have 3 locks on the outside of the doors? We turned to the last pair of doors and began unlocking the bolts. Inside, we found the same setup. While I was still examining the room, my friend stepped back into the hallway and into the last remaining room. Shortly after, I heard him call out,
Hey, come and look at this.
Inside the last room, there was a hatch in the ceiling leading to an attic. We slid the wardrobe beneath the hatch, and I stood on it. Once I opened the hatch and looked inside the dark attic, I tested the floor with my free hand. It was severely unstable and wouldn't have been able to support my weight, so I didn't want to risk climbing up fully. I looked around a bit more, and I found an old rusted metal bat. The thing had taken a beating, or had given one, as it was heavily dented and worn. Look, I said, handing my friend the bat.
Locks on the doors? Metal bolts? What was this place?
After exploring the rest of the building and finding nothing more of interest, we went back down to the garden. Because it was so dark inside, we hadn't noticed the sunset, and it was almost pitch black outside at this point. We sat opposite the front door and began rolling a cigarette and discussing what we had found, when something made me look up at one of the windows. To this day, I still struggle to find the words to describe what I saw. I saw a figure standing in the window of one of the bedrooms. It wasn't transparent like a traditional ghost, nor was it solid. It was almost like an amalgamation of liquid and smoke. The figure's shape seemed to be illuminated by a glow that emanated from its form. I can make out that it was wearing a white doctor's coat contrasting the dark background. Its appearance had me completely frozen to the spot, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Suddenly, I regained control of myself, and without saying a single word, I sprinted for the wall. As I was running, I wondered if I had really seen the apparition or not. My friend, who was much faster than me, stormed past me and continued running. Eventually, I caught up to him and asked him why he had been running, since I wasn't completely sure if he saw the same thing. What he said next has haunted me ever since.
I saw it too. The thing in the doctor's coat, standing in the window.
So these two experiences happened within a month of each other. The first one happened to my brother-in-law. The second one I witnessed firsthand. So here we go. Back in 2007, my sister and her husband used to live with me and my mother. I was in middle school at the time. One Saturday night, my brother-in-law was working at his security job, and my sister and I were with my mom at a church function. These church services would last until about 8 to 8:30, so we wouldn't get home until around 9. That night, we pulled up to our mobile home. Usually, my brother-in-law would be inside waiting for us, but instead, he was outside standing by himself, looking like he had seen a ghost. As we pull into the carport, I notice that all the lights are off inside. When we get out of the car, he lifts his hand, points at the house, and says in a shaken voice,
I'm not going in there by myself.
We asked him what happened, and this is what he told us.
I came home, and I was walking into the carport, and was about to enter the house. I heard what sounded like a group of people talking and laughing inside the house. I heard silverware and dishes clinking like there was some sort of dinner party, but all the lights were off. I thought you guys were trying to pull a prank on me or something. So I go up the steps, and I pull out my house key. The whole time, I still hear muffled chatter and laughing and even music. As soon as I put the house key into the doorknob lock, I heard someone go, shh, and then the entire house went silent, like everything just stopped at once. As soon as I open the door, I hear a fucking stampede of people running in the opposite direction. At this point, I'm starting to think that it wasn't a prank, and some people had broken into the house and were trying to leave before they got caught. So I ran around the back of the house to cut them off at the back door. But once I got there, everything went quiet. I thought that maybe whoever was inside didn't run out because they knew I was on the other side. So I sprinted back to the front door, opened it, and ran inside. It was quiet and pitch black. I turned on all the lights and cleared the entire house. Not one thing was out of place. Nothing to indicate at all that anyone was there. That's when I ran outside and waited for you guys to get here.
The second occurrence happened a month later, in the same house. My mom was out doing something, I don't remember what, and my sister and her husband were on a date. Halo 3 had just come out, and my brother-in-law kept his Xbox in his room. Before he left that night, I begged him to play the game while he was gone, and he reluctantly agreed. So I had the whole house all to myself. I turned on all the lights in the house for obvious reasons, but since I wanted the full effect of the video game, I turned off the light in my brother-in-law's room. So the only light was coming from the TV. As I'm playing, I feel like someone's walking around in the house. When living in a mobile home, you can feel every movement. I paused the game and waited to hear something. After a few moments of silence, I decided to say something. Hello? No response. I go back to playing the game, brushing off the noise. A few moments later, I see a shadow from under the door out of the corner of my eye. I pause the game and look directly at the door, and the shadow moves out of sight. At first, I think someone had come home early, so I call out again, but I get no response. Now I'm getting a little freaked out and sitting in the dark room trying to hear any noises in the house. All of a sudden, I hear the refrigerator door open. Everybody knows that sound. I get up and open the door. I look to the left where the kitchen was. The refrigerator door was closed, but the kitchen light was now off. In fact, all the lights on the left side of the house were off. Now I'm low-key starting to panic, thinking that there's a burglar or something in the house. So I quietly walk to the living room, keeping my eye on the dark dining room area, and then turn on the TV, turning up the volume as loud as I can. I then turn on the kitchen light, which slightly illuminates the dining room. I then quickly turn on the dining room light and jumped into the middle of the room, yelling, hoping that I would frighten any trespassers. However, no one was there. I then run through the entire house as fast as I could, bashing doors and yelling as I do so. No one other than me was inside the house, and all the doors and windows were closed and locked. If someone had opened the fridge, they wouldn't have had enough time to get past the door to go outside without me seeing. I go back into my brother-in-law's room, lock the door, and blast the TV as loud as I could, and played Halo 3 until my mom got home. I know that our landlord's parents had both died inside that house of old age. The kitchen and the dining room were the spots where most of the activity took place. Before this, I didn't really believe in ghosts or demonic entities, but the power of experience is persuading. There's always a reason to be afraid.
I preface this encounter by saying simply, everything I describe is very real to me. Welcome to the stories of some of the scariest experiences of my life, and the woman with black hair in all white. Everything begins when I was in my early years of high school. My sister, quite a few years older than me, moved out of our home and into her first apartment. My mom was seeing someone new for the first time in a decade after her divorce from my father. My soon-to-be stepfather's children would soon have a room in our house, which was my sister's previously. It was the summer and I, a young teenager, often spent my late nights on the couch downstairs video chatting with friends on my laptop. On one particular night, it was about 2 a.m. and my friends and I had just disconnected our video call when I heard a peculiar noise at my feet. The sound most closely resembled nails scratching at the pillows that were near my feet. I was immediately filled with dread, and my legs began to grow colder. My laptop was on my chest, cutting off all view of my lower body, in fear of who or what I might see if I looked over or around my screen. I called my mother from upstairs. I was facing the stairs, and when she came halfway down them, out of bed, I asked her, "What's sitting by my feet?" She angrily replied, obviously since I had just woken her, "Nothing. What's the problem?" I felt better, but not enough to stay downstairs. I went upstairs and climbed into bed for the night. I always slept with the TV on and my door open. I fell asleep just fine, but was woken abruptly in the middle of the night. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia was on. It took me a moment to realize what was happening, but I soon grasped that what the gang was doing was digging up a grave to steal the jewelry from a corpse, or something like it. I was too young to really appreciate the show. Soon after, the characters opened the uncovered coffin and the camera showed the rotting corpse, wearing a white dress. As the camera zoomed in on the rotting skull, my bedroom door slammed shut, and the same scratching sound from earlier grew loud on the pillow right beside my head. I pulled the blankets over my head and forced myself to fall asleep to escape the hell that I had found myself in. Some time passed with no further activity. I found myself in the hospital. My sister was giving birth to her first son. I started to tell the story to my aunt, who had lived in the old house as a kid. She explained that these sorts of things were in no way strange. I was perplexed. She described that my mother had seen the same woman as a child, but as an adult never admitted it. Actually, whenever I brought it up, my mother only smiled lightly. I believe it was part of her coping process in order to continue to live in the house for many years to come. Soon after my sister got out of the hospital, I brought up the events to her. She was very calm and described that when she lived in the house, a woman in a white dress would come down from the attic, walk into her room, and stand there silently, staring at her. She described that the woman would always have long black hair draped over her face. My sister told me she would often ask the woman what she wanted, and after getting no response, would ask her to go away, which she respectfully did, returning to the attic. After this, perhaps it was just the fear of what I had been told, I always swore that I saw the same woman lingering throughout the house, always in the corner of my eye, drifting into my sister's old room. Later in the summer, there was a night when my family, which was now me, my mom, and my soon-to-be stepdad, were gathered downstairs in the living room. My mom asked if I could go upstairs and close my sister's old bedroom door, which was located at the end of the short hallway, so that the heat didn't draft into her vacant room, but rather into the 2 occupied bedrooms. I did as I was asked. When I approached the dark room, I reached my hand normally toward the knob, but as I touched the brass handle, things changed. The door flew shut in my face. Immediately, I thought that someone had broken into our home and was in my sister's room. I tried the knob several times, but the door was locked tight. I ran downstairs and explained what had happened, and that it was probably wise if we left the house and called the police. She didn't believe me at first and asked, laughing, that we go up and inspect the door. So I grabbed my Little League bat and the three of us went to check it. Each of us pulled on the knob, and were unsuccessful. We heard movement from the room, and my mom and I went outside to wait in the car with the police on speed dial as we'll just say stepdad for ease, stepdad attempted to get into the room. Eventually, when nothing terrible had happened, we went back inside and approached the door once again. My mom, not believing in the ghost stories that had swirled through her home for generations, simply said, "All right, this is enough. Just open the door." As she reached for the knob, just that happened. The door swung open. I went inside, checking under the bed, behind the door, and in the closet, but finding nothing. My grandfather used to come visit us quite often before he passed. It was easy since he lived in the house he had built next door once he gave our house to my mother. He told me a story, although I couldn't tell if he was just messing with me, as he often did. He pointed to the large oak tree in the center of our backyard. He said that a long time ago, a man and a woman lived in the house. The husband had gone insane and killed his wife in there before going to the oak tree that stood right beside the one in our front yard and hung himself. He continued to say that they cut down the oak tree that the deed had been committed on, and they left the untainted one standing. What happened next, however, was too real. He took me for a walk behind his house, into the woods. A few hundred yards into the woods was a seemingly ancient cemetery. He described that in that cemetery was where the woman was buried, while the man had been cremated. Really, I didn't think about this story as much as most probably would, maybe because it was the only thing that made concrete sense out of everything that had been happening. A lot more time passed with no significant events taking place. I had only told my best friend, Dan, one of the experiences. One night I planned to stay over at his house. We were much older at this point, juniors in high school, I believe, considering that we were driving. Still having an innate fear of the home that I lived in, especially being there alone, I asked him to come in with me to grab some clothes for the night. He came inside and followed me to the basement where my freshly dried shirts were. He started taunting. "Come out, spirits, come on. Don't be a bitch. Come out here." I explained to him, "Dan, the basement looks creepy, but everything bad in this house is upstairs. Please stop. You get to leave here and never come back. I have to try to sleep here." He seemed to understand, and didn't say anything as we climbed the stairs where all of my books and notebooks from the school year were presently stacked. However, when we went into my bedroom, he tried once more to get a glimpse at what I had been describing. As I knelt down to my lowest drawer to get a pair of socks, he began the taunting once more. As he stopped yelling, we heard a large crash from downstairs. "I told you," I said sadly. When we peered downstairs, we saw that all of the books had been thrown across the room. We didn't say anything to one another. We didn't try to clean up the mess. We just left. Years later, as I write this, the house has been seized by the bank in an equally complicated series of events. I live about 20 minutes from the old house as it sits, rotting. Sometimes I drive there and just sit in the driveway, staring into the upstairs window of my sister's old bedroom, wondering if there's a woman with dark hair staring back. Never once in my life did I go into the attic. The closest I ever came was when, one day, my sister and her now 2 boys were visiting. Her younger son and I were upstairs playing with trucks when suddenly he ran into the bathroom. Now the bathroom was where the steps to the attic were, which my mom had blocked off with several layers of plastic for whatever reason. I was terrified. He had run toward what I considered to be the lion's den. I approached the doorway that went to the stairs, which went to the attic. I peeked in and could barely make the child out in the darkness. He was at the top of the stairs, looking at the plastic, talking in his newly forming broken English to someone, something, that had called him to the stairway that he didn't know existed. In a rush of courage, I sprinted up the stairs, scooped him up, and shut the door behind me for the last time before we moved out. First, as a side note, my son-in-law, SIL, lost his father his senior year of high school, so none of us knew this man. Fast forward years later, my daughter, SIL, and grandson, just turned 3, were relocating because of employment and in the process of unpacking. My SIL hadn't opened a box of items for years that included photos of his father and decided to go through some of it. Wanting to share something with his little boy, my SIL called my grandson into the room and said, "I'd like to show you a picture of someone." My grandson is given the picture to hold, and my SIL is going to tell him about the man in the picture being his grandfather when my grandson said, "I know him." My SIL attempted a couple of times to let my grandson know that he couldn't be correct, but when a toddler is determined, my grandson would mention this a few more times, but my kids never pushed it. I think my SIL was still too torn up about his father to even consider what may have been happening, and so just acted like it wasn't happening at all. Yet, to my SIL's credit, he never tried to tell my grandson that he was wrong or that it was pretend, because my SIL didn't want to discredit my grandson. It also wasn't really spoken of outside of our family unit, not from embarrassment or anything, but out of respect for my SIL, who felt that was something private for the family only. Also, this was never brought up to my grandson and only spoken of if he brought it up. My SIL probably just wasn't ready for this. My grandson is 7 now and has no memory of any of this happening. He only knows of having this grandfather via photos. This story takes place in 2017. My then best friend, I'll call her Lex, and I were having a sleepover at my dad's house. I was 16 at the time, her being 17. We often had sleepovers on Fridays where we would eat junk food, watch as much Netflix as possible, and have deep conversations. This night was no different, and so unremarkable that I've forgotten everything that we did. That is, of course, until we were trying to fall asleep in my bed. I remember being completely exhausted, slowly but surely drifting off despite sharing a bed with someone. I was just on the brink of sleep when Lex got my attention. First, she simply asked if I was awake. I grunted in response, signaling for her to continue. It should be said that I was quite literally a minute or two away from unconsciousness, so I didn't pick up on her tone of voice or think much about what she said next. "I'm gonna go use the bathroom downstairs," she told me, getting off the bed. This wasn't normal, her announcing that she would be slipping away to use the restroom, but I was too out of it to be annoyed or curious. Not long after she left, probably no more than 10 seconds, it started happening. Again, I was on the precipice of sleep, so my mind wasn't racing with thoughts or in any state to freak myself out. Nevertheless, I became filled with the feeling of impending danger out of absolutely nowhere. I was becoming very lucid very quickly as dread and anxiety overwhelmed me. I had never felt this kind of acute fear before, nor seemingly out of nowhere. Now wide awake, I opened my eyes and stared at the wall. Less than a foot away from my face, as I slept facing away from the bedroom door. My heart raced as I tried to understand the situation, but I didn't move. Something told me that moving would be a very bad idea. My room was pitch black as well, so that didn't help matters. All I could think about was how scared I was, and how I hoped that Lex would return soon. I can guess that a few minutes passed like this when suddenly the bed dipped on the side that I wasn't occupying, as if someone were sitting down. Problem was, not only did Lex struggle to get onto my bed due to its height, but my bedroom door had never opened. At this point, I was petrified, and I only became more afraid as I felt something against the back of my body. It felt like a person, just gently pressed against me. I thought to myself hysterically that there was no way this was actually happening. I held my breath to better isolate the feeling, horrified to feel the presence moving as if it were breathing, too. In and out, pressed against me. In and out. The atmosphere is still suffocating in the room, filled with what I can only describe as evilness. The aura of whatever was touching me screamed danger. Don't move. I will hurt you. My mind and heart are racing as I try to think of a way out of this. The only balm I have to lessen my anxiety is the fact that I know Lex will eventually return. But what happens then? She wouldn't see whatever it was pressed against me when she entered the bedroom, too occupied with making sure she wasn't disturbing my sleep. So I told myself that once I heard the door open, I would address her and ask her to turn on the lights. After what I would come to find out was about half an hour, Lex finally did return. The second I heard the door open and light flooded into the bedroom, I called her name. She hesitated, her soft voice saying, "Yeah?" I requested bluntly, "Turn on the lights." She did as I asked, and I shot like a bullet from my previous position, whipping around to inspect the area where I had felt the presence. There was nothing. I wouldn't notice right away, but later I realized that the horrifying aura that was plaguing my bedroom had vanished once Lex arrived. It was gone just as suddenly as it had appeared. Still, I was in a state of horror for the next few hours. We watched some cartoons together and decided to sleep with the lights on, but not before talking about what had just happened. Lex revealed to me that the reason she had gone downstairs wasn't to use the restroom, but to call her boyfriend for emotional support. She told me that she had felt panicked, wanting to leave the room to escape from the stifling feeling. Lex couldn't get a hold of him, and spent the next 30 minutes or so trying to calm herself down. In the morning, Lex and I would confide in my dad, the only other person in the house. He was rightly disturbed and told us that he had a nightmare that night. I can't remember what his nightmare consisted of, only that it was a really bad one. My dad is a veteran, so he is not easily spooked, but it left him uneasy. The fact that my dad had a nightmare at all made this whole experience more notable to me. To wrap things up, I want to say that I had improperly used a spirit board a few years before this with a few of my friends at my dad's house. We were children, so we didn't take it any more seriously than any other Halloween game. Nothing of this magnitude had ever occurred before, though. Just this one night. Lex and I were able to acquire holy water from one of the teachers at our high school after she told him the story. We used it to cleanse my bedroom. Nothing strange has happened to me, or my dad, since. Not entirely my story, but the main event happened to my mom when she lived at home with my grandparents. Back when she was a teen, they had a beagle that would often stare down the hallway and growl at nothing, the whole deal. In the middle of the night while lying in bed, my mom heard the dog begin to growl just before she felt someone grab her by the ankles and begin to yank her out of her bed. She says she was halfway pulled onto the carpet before she started saying the Lord's Prayer and the hands let go of her. But her dog was still going absolutely nuts. There have been other little things that have happened there too involving other people in my family. No one seems immensely worried about it, but I've always had the feeling of being watched in that house, even before knowing some of the stories I've heard now that I'm older. It's always the same one. My grandparents have lived in it since it was built when they were first married, so no bad history of the house itself, but perhaps the land that it's on? My grandma has told us stories about seeing shadow figures walking down the hall. My brother smelled my grandpa's cigar smoke in the kitchen during a family event. My grandpa had passed away a couple of years ago. Used to always smoke a certain brand of cigar outside on the back porch. And I once was startled by a loud, raspy cough right behind me while I sat in the empty house playing computer games with the speakers off. Recently, my mom and I had installed some cameras in the basement and on the front and back porches, just for extra security. I'm dreading the day my grandma tells us one of them caught something, and I'll have to see it with my own eyes. This story occurred several years ago. I had traveled to Georgia from Turkey for vacation. I heard the views were beautiful. It was recommended by a friend. Being young and dumb, I agreed. Why not, I asked myself. So I booked a flight. I found a cheap house that looked good. Good deal, I thought, and it was next to a mountain. The trouble began. I entered the house after I received my keys. I got a bad aura from the place as a whole. There were a lot of paintings in the house, a TV. It was quite decked. Why sell the house for so cheap if it's good? I asked myself. I went to an electronics store, got some data, and started watching some YouTube in the kitchen. After a while, I looked around the house. Something was off. I could tell. The house gave me an uneasy feeling as a whole. I felt like I had butterflies in my stomach, so I did a little tour around, looking at the furniture and all, the usual. I went to a bedroom upstairs. As soon as I came into that specific room, it had an even worse aura than the rest of the house. I went and sat on the bed. There was a little window and a table on the right side of the room. It gave a beautiful view. I felt like I needed to go to the bathroom. I go in. As I'm doing my thing, I feel someone walking upstairs. I could definitely hear something. When I go to wash my hands, I'm amazed. I see red stains, blood, all over the sink. I thought it was very sketchy. I felt scared instantly. I don't know why. Not a normal panic. To the bone panic. I washed my hands and got out instantly. It's night already? I thought. I look at my phone and it's 5-something p.m., early night. I wash the stains away from the sink and go to the bedroom because of the strong aura it gave off. I somehow ended up sleeping on the bed, probably because of the exhaustion from traveling. I ended up being awoken by a loud scream. I mean loud. Never heard such a blood-curdling scream in my life. It was so loud I didn't even know where it came from. I ran to the window, nothing. Ran downstairs, and to my horror, I hear the scream coming from upstairs. You see, when I heard the scream come from upstairs, I got a bad, bad feeling. My guts told me, run. And so I did, out of the house, locked the door, looked at the window upstairs. Bad, bad decision. Someone had covered it with curtains. I knew I hadn't covered it with curtains because I ran downstairs immediately after hearing the scream. I'm so scared I went to my car and sat in there thinking of what the hell was going on as my heart raced. I picked up all my courage, which took me an hour or two, and I went in. I knew nobody in that country. This was my first experience living there, and it was hell. I went in the house, stood in the front door for God knows how long, and took a step inside. I went upstairs slowly, entered that cursed bedroom. A painting had fallen and the windows and curtains were somehow gone. The window was closed, though. I look under the bed and the closet, suspecting someone to be there with a knife from the kitchen. I feel a touch on my shoulder. I look behind me quickly. It's a random Georgian man. and I asked him what the hell he was doing here. He said he was the previous house owner, and that the realtor who sold me the house sold it for cheap because it is haunted. He said that he himself left the house and told the realtor that he didn't want to sell, but he did anyways. He told me to get out with all of my belongings, and so I did. He said the family that lived there previously were sketchy as hell. I left the house the day after, sleeping in my car. The rest of the few weeks there were pretty good. I've had horrid dreams of dying and someone hysterically laughing ever since. Please, do not buy deals that are too good to be true. The house owner also mentioned that the bedroom I hated and got a bad aura from was because they had done their rituals or whatever things in there, and that sleeping on that bed, quote unquote, gave me the curse. Never returned, never will. I can't remember if this was late 2017 or mid 2018 due to my photos being everywhere and the dates being mixed up, but I'm pretty sure this was Halloween or near Halloween of 2017. I had already moved out of home and was now living about 20 minutes down the road in another area of the beach. My friend at the time was getting ready to go meet up with someone, and being that I was single at the time, I decided to do the same as, like I said, it was almost Halloween. I did not know this person well, and back then I was kind of oblivious to the dangers of Tinder, etc., although nothing bad had happened when I went out with him. So we had made plans to go to a Halloween tour out in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond is where the Civil War had taken place decades ago. We went to Williamsburg, to be specific. Old Town. He lived about an hour from me, and it was about an hour and a half drive to get to our destination. We arrived and went to pay the tickets as soon as we could, being the tours were already starting. To set the record straight, I was super attracted to this guy, so that would explain some of the things unrelated in this story. We followed behind a couple tours as people were walking around. The tour guides told us stories of the Civil War, the horrible things that had happened, ghost stories, and even showed us a street that they told us used to flood with blood back in the days of the war. We listened to multiple stories and then took off on our own to less populated areas and looked around at the old buildings and such. At some point, we had snuck off and hid in a dark alley to make out, and things had almost gotten a little wild during that makeout session, so we stopped out of fear of getting caught. We then sat at one of the tables in a quiet and empty area in the dark and just started talking before he had walked me to the bathroom. I went in, and as I sat down I realized it was empty, but I felt like there was someone in the stall next to me the entire time. I had a horrible, eerie feeling since the night had gotten darker and it felt like we were being watched the whole time. But I freaked out and hurried to leave the bathroom. I told him what had happened as we started heading towards some bigger, older-looking buildings to explore some more. He told me that he had seen a shadow in one of them. We were basically exploring the whole area, up until there was roughly an hour left for all tours before they started shutting things down and everyone had to leave. This is the moment that I will always remember. We headed off toward where the old houses were, where the guides had told us stories of children being kidnapped and things like that. The road was empty, and we were the only two there. We walked up to one of the houses. It was fairly big, about 3 stories high, and none of the lights were on in any of those houses, so it's safe to assume there's also none of the people who worked there inside anywhere either. He ran up to the window of the house and knocked on it. I looked back and saw him in a panicked and rushed run toward me. He told me he had seen a figure in the window looking back at him. Not even a good 2 seconds later, all the lights, and not just that house, but every house on that road, had turned on. And as if that wasn't bad enough, we saw the figures in the window. And the war siren from back in the war days sounded. It went from the house we were standing at and rung out all the way down the street of houses before stopping. Our bones were chilled, and we hauled ass back to find our car. This is one of the unexplained series of events and the existence of the unknown in my very intimate environment. Location. My grandma's apartment is in one of the populous areas of Yangon's downtown, which is a 30-year-old apartment that has no record of criminal activity or any violent events whatsoever. The place? There's a room in this apartment that is always gloomy and subsequently felt ominous whenever a living soul would pass around it or in it. It's a typical, normal bedroom. Queen-sized bed, modern furniture, and a picture of Jesus Christ in it. Even though there's nothing abnormal about the room itself, the aura that it gave out is evil. It used to be my late grandpa's room, in which he was suffering from hepatitis C. The problem. The room itself is locked now and no one lives in it, since it used to cause the house members and guests chills whenever a person or just someone would pass around the room unexpectedly. Whenever you look inside it, there's no one. Sometimes a 3-second long snickering laugh in a low tone can be heard. This can happen at any time of the day. Sometimes there's nothing at all. But whenever a person tries to lay on the bed of that room, everyone who's done it has said that they felt someone is watching them with an evil smile. But it's just their feeling, including mine. Another common denominator is that we cannot identify how that evil looks or where it came from. We all know that something is just there. What all of the house members and guests agree on is that something is watching the bed, as previously stated, with an evil smile. The aftermath. Even though no one goes near there and the room is locked since my grandpa's death, we are all worried due to the frequent sounds and laughter that we can hear at any random time. My aunt, who lives with my grandma at the same apartment, said that clapping can also be heard at a certain time of night, but not regularly. But it can't be anything from upstairs coming down, because upstairs is an empty hall that's been cleaned and locked by the previous owners until they find another renter. These events are strange since they didn't happen right away after my grandparents moved in. It started happening like a decade after they've been living there. The rest is history. I hope you all can tell me what it is. All the family members are questioning to this day. I've been reading a bunch of stories on here and remembered these experiences I had as a 5 or 6-year-old. Bear with me. I know I shouldn't be able to remember that far back, but this creeped me out to this day. I usually slept in my own room before I became a paranoid child. I had a twin-sized bed in my old house. The door to my room was about 10 feet to the left of my bed. Between the ages of 5 and 6, maybe 7, I had numerous experiences with 2 different I don't want to say ghosts, demons. I really don't know. It started after what I thought was just a disturbingly vivid, recurring dream. I'm a lucid dreamer, and when I was little, I would wake up by screaming. This might sound funny, but when I did, a skeleton head would appear out of nowhere and shake me until I woke up. It went like this. It would either be late evening or midnight, and the fish nightlight I had would be a little dimmer than usual. I was always freezing cold, but not winter cold, like that cold you get when you're playing frisbee on a cool summer day. A chilly arm cold. I would always hear a creepy hum, like 10 seconds before she showed up. A lady, a tall, thin, hunched-over lady, wearing a dress in a color I couldn't identify, would open the door. Her hair would be covering her face. She would walk around for a bit, and I would just sit, like literally frozen in fear. Anytime I would try to scream, nothing came out, and she would notice and jump at me. I would always wake up in a cold sweat. That kept happening for about a year. It slowed down after 6 months because of one occurrence. It was like an out-of-body experience, but with ghosts. I would start in my parents' bedroom and float over down the hallway to my room. I would float up until I was right above my bed, and I saw a shadow of a man, like he was made of nothing. He was like 8 feet tall, and his arms went down to his knees. He was almost twig thin, and he was bald. He was looking down at my body like he was checking to see if I was okay, and he stiffened up after a few seconds, and slowly looked up to where I was, dream me. He had no face. After that, I woke up. When I was about 9, a few months before we moved, my dad told me he had met a woman who knocked on our door for no reason. She told him 2 people had died in our house. One, a dude who had a heart attack, and the other, a woman who fell down the stairs and broke her neck. I cannot make this shit up. I'm now in 8th grade, and I need answers to what the hell this could be. When I was a kid, I lived in a little 1-story house with my dad, my older sister, and my stepmom. It was a nice and quiet place. We had hardwood floors, and there was a hallway leading from the living room into where the bedrooms were. It was a rather dark hallway which turned to the left and led to a guest bedroom and my parents' bedroom. The reason it was dark was because there was just a single dim light on the ceiling between the 2 bathrooms and the second bedroom, which was at the end of the hallway before it turned left. There was also an attic door right above the master bedroom's door. We never really opened it. It's weird. It just didn't feel like we had permission to, even though we did and could use it any time. I can recall one day after school I returned home to the house being empty. My sister was at a friend's house and my parents went out to try and surprise us with McDonald's before we came back home. I remember calling out my sister's name to see if she was home as well as my mom and dad's name, and no one responded. I went into my parents' bedroom where they had a computer. I sat down and started to turn it on, hoping to get a few minutes of gaming in before my parents came back. As I sat there, the room felt like it was getting darker, but I told myself that my eyes were just adjusting to the computer monitor in front of me. The computer which was taking a rather long time to boot up. Back then, I was maybe 10 years old. I looked around the room to see if my eyes would adjust, but it was still extremely dark even though the light was on, and it just seemed like they couldn't. It also started to feel colder and colder, and when I looked up again, the ceiling was completely black, and the darkness shrouded the light above me with a thick black haze. Immediately, I looked back at the computer to compose myself and tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just a kid that was creeped out for no reason. As I focused on the monitor, the room was cold and quiet. And suddenly, a woman's voice whispered shortly and sternly, my name. I could feel the wind on my ear and the pressure of someone holding my shoulder. I bolted out of the room, and moments later my dad came through the front door smiling and holding a kid's meal in his hand, asking me how my day at school went. I didn't tell him what had just happened. A little while passed, and my dad began having his own experiences in the house. Sometimes he would fall asleep watching his favorite TV shows on the sofa. In the middle of the night, when we had all fallen asleep, he would wake up and hear footsteps walking around the living room. He would also hear chains being dragged across the floor. At the time, we also had a dog. He said that our dog's head would follow the footsteps, and that was how he knew he wasn't just imagining it. The footsteps would lead into the kitchen, pausing for a moment before something dropped from the kitchen counter. Sometimes when one of us was alone in the house, we would hear little girls giggling and laughing in the bathroom at the end of the hall. I remember my dad talking to some of the adults in a serious tone. He said he could see the shadows of two people from underneath the door. He would open it after no reply, and there would be no one there. He would then notice that he was alone in the house. This was a common incident that many of us had experienced ourselves. My stepmom didn't like children, but she hid it very well from my dad. When he would leave for work, he would leave for 15 to 20-hour shifts. Sometimes she would put me in the basement and said if I couldn't behave myself like a person, I would be treated like an animal. The thing about being downstairs is that she would turn off the lights so that you would be downstairs and it would be completely black. It would feel like something was staring at me from the corner of the room. Something that was slowly creeping closer and closer to where I was sitting. Sometimes I would hear feet dragging in the distance, accompanied by tapping sounds similar to fingernails tapping on the concrete floor. This only happened soon after the sun had set and the basement was once again too dark to even see my hand waving in front of my face. As the sounds came closer and closer, I would hug my legs in a fetal position. At that point, I would sing a song from Anastasia, the one that my sister and I used to sing together, and hearing my voice made me feel less alone in that situation. Even as I felt the air thicken and the feeling of something weighing in next to me, waiting for me to open my eyes and take a look. Each time that I did manage to open my eyes in an attempt to see what it was, it would still be so dark that I didn't know if something was there or not. I learned how to toughen up and deal with that thing by treating it like a bully. Just don't let it get to you, don't let it bother you, I would tell myself. But the utter relief of the light turning on and being allowed to come back upstairs and watching my dad pull into the driveway was the best feeling in the world. Another one of my stepmom's favorite punishments would once again be in the basement. She would have my sister and I fold the clothes from the laundry machine. She would later tell one of us to go upstairs and then proceed to throw all of the clothes on the ground and then tell us to fold it again by ourselves. Downstairs, my sister and I knew that something was not right. The room had a TV and a small, dusty sofa. The door would always be open, and it felt like someone or something wanted you to come inside. It was almost magnetic. At times, we would have to go into the basement room whenever my stepmom had her friends over. We had to be quiet downstairs without a peep, or else she would get upset. Due to the giggling ghosts who were upstairs, we always seemed to get the blame, and were punished according to her mood. When I turned 12 or so, 2 of my dad's brothers moved into the house with us. One of my uncles slept in the guest bedroom, while their other uncle slept in the basement room. Sometimes we would go down there to see if he was hungry. When we entered the room, my uncle would be laying on the sofa with his eyes open, not blinking, and unresponsive. This would go on for a good hour or so. My dad said there wasn't anything downstairs, but he rarely went down there at all. My uncle said that there was something evil, and that it was trying to get into his body. My other uncle, who slept in the guest bedroom, said that when he was asleep he had a dream where a Confederate soldier without eyes kept screaming that they had been taken from him. He woke to see a floating blob of light right in front of his face. I remember one night as my sister and I were falling asleep, my dad kept yelling down the hall from the living room for us to stop talking and get some rest. He said it a few more times before my sister and I said we weren't talking. He then turned off the hallway light and said goodnight. Moments later, I opened my eyes, and behind our bedroom door was a little girl in old pajamas. She had long black hair and nearly blended in with the shadows. I stared at her and then covered my head with my blanket. Later on, 2 of my cousins moved in after my uncles moved out. They had our old bedroom, and my sister and I took the guest bedroom. My cousins were both boys, and we were supposed to help them get used to living with us. They kept fighting with each other. The youngest one would climb into my bed in the middle of the night because he didn't want to fight with his older brother. We had a lock on our bedroom door, and that made him feel better. Also, he did mention that the bedroom scared him, but I didn't ask why. Eventually, the oldest one started to walk around the house at night. We found makeshift weapons like a stick with sharp rocks on it, and a strong thread with something sharp on it as well. He said he was going to kill our stepmother and everyone else in the house. He was maybe just 12 or 13 at the time. Eventually, law enforcement became involved, and he was deemed insane. Once my dad found out about my stepmother's abuse, he swiftly divorced her, and we moved. We never saw her again. One thing I remember is while we were moving out, the landlord stopped by and had baked us all cookies. My dad asked them if anyone had died in the house. The landlords were shocked and said, "Yeah, there was an older lady who died from depression upstairs in the attic." They then asked my dad how he knew. He told them about our experiences. They also mentioned that the house was built on an old battleground. To this day, sometimes I drive past the house and think about knocking on the tenant's door. I'm from an extremely rural area in eastern Kentucky. I grew up in the woods, last house on my gravel road. I lived up there with my grandparents for most of my childhood, and the other part with my mom next door. Living with my grandparents, they would sleep separately. They both snored and would keep each other awake, so me and my little sister would sleep with my mama. My mama's bedroom was at the back right of the house, and the windows faced the woods. The side of the bed I slept on was the side closest to the windows, and in the summer we would sleep with them up and a screen in it and the blinds up too so that I could lay there and just stare outside at night into the darkness, which I did many a night. So many times laying there I would just stare, almost paralyzed. I couldn't close my eyes. I would feel something watching me from the top of the hill. I would hear what sounded like chainsaws and growling. I heard this so many times. I would go to school absolutely exhausted because I could never go to sleep. After I got a little older, I started sleeping on the couch in the living room. In the living room, they have a huge bay window that faced the front yard. The front yard kind of goes down a slope, and there's a huge, probably 200-year-old oak tree. I ended up doing the same thing, staring into the dark on many nights from that location, knowing that something was watching me from under the tree. Some nights I would just lay there and cry, knowing that unless it stopped looking at me, I wasn't going to go to sleep anytime soon. By the time I was around 12, we started staying with my mom again. Her double wide was right beside my grandparents'. There was a field in between, and we had a path that we would walk back and forth any time, day or night. I would walk home late sometimes, and something would follow me on the path. I didn't feel like it would hurt me, but I also didn't feel like it liked me either. In the double wide, we had 3 bedrooms. Mine and my sister's were on the opposite side of the house from my mom's master bedroom and bathroom. Our side of the trailer was always really cold. We usually slept with my mom after her and my dad divorced. My mom is epileptic, so besides it being cold in our bedroom, we could also keep an eye on her because at the time she was having a lot of seizures from stress. I would sleep on the right side of the bed facing the bathroom. We always kept that door open, so I could always look into it. I can't tell you how many times I laid there at night, and by the dim of the nightlight I would see a woman sitting in the floor in front of the toilet, whimpering, in the fetal position. I would wake my mom up and tell her, but she would just tell me to go to sleep. I think my sister saw her once. In the summer when it was warm, sometimes we would sleep in our bedrooms, and I would see troll-like creatures in my closet. I would close my closet door, but by morning it would be cracked open. To this day I have dreams about that closet. I dream that I walk into it, and it's like it was before it got repossessed. Half of my clothes were hanging, clothes that I had grown out of and just left in the back. Some old toys would be laying around, but there would be a door at the end of the closet. It was a walk-in closet. I would go through the door, and it would be a hallway with a few doors on either side, but at the end of the hallway there was a TV in a room with a blue light coming from it, with a small, fat man sitting in front of it. He reminded me of Danny DeVito, but he looked really mean. Back to my grandparents' house. I'm not the only one that has witnessed to things in their house. After my mom's trailer got repossessed, she was in the bathroom getting ready for work one morning. My pap would take my mom all to work every morning around 6:30, so by the time that he got back, we were ready to get on the school bus. My mom thought that he had come back home earlier than usual. She hadn't been up long and was just getting ready to get in the shower. She heard my papa open the door, sit down in his recliner, and pop it open and grab his spit bottle. She said, "That was quick." No reply. She went in there, and there was no one. My grandma has also seen red lights drift around the house room to room before. My mom and Mama were sitting in the living room one night and said that they saw a man run from bedroom to bedroom in his underwear like he was trying not to get caught. My grandpa was in the recliner asleep. Okay, so, present day. My little sister recently got married and bought a trailer and placed it in the exact same spot that we had our double wide when we were younger. It wasn't even a week after they moved in that stuff started happening. My brother-in-law was getting ready to take their dog outside to use the bathroom when the dog started going crazy. He was in the living room trying to get the dog ready to go outside when he said that he saw a black shadow go into the back bedroom. The dog bolted back there. He said when he got back there, the dog was terrified. Twice also they have come home and lights have been on that they know were out before they left. There is something in the holler up there. I don't know what it is. No one ever really believed much of anything I said as a kid, but I'm glad people are witnessing it now. I've got chill bumps typing this out. It honestly makes me emotional because this was my home for so long, and things are still happening. Okay, so this has happened 2 times that we noticed. The first time was 3 months ago. At 2 a.m. my husband was playing an Xbox game. Name of the game was Halo. So it was only my husband. My kids were asleep upstairs, and I was down in the basement in our room in bed. I was reading. He told me that he was on the couch. The game was paused since he was looking in his phone for a cheat or something for it. By the stairs, he clearly heard, "Mommy." My daughter doesn't call me like this, but they were asleep. He even checked. This was yesterday. At 5 p.m., I was coloring in the living room. The TV was on a Parking Wars episode, and my kids were upstairs playing a game. The hubby was outside mowing the yard. I clearly heard, "Mommy? Mommy, Mommy." Clearly a little girl, and it sounded like it was behind me, not where my kids would be. And it was not my daughter's voice. Now today, I was folding clothes and had small hand towels by me. I watched as they were pushed off of the couch and away from me. Not like they would if they had just fallen down. When I first moved into my house, about 11 years ago, a lot of strange things happened. About a week after my family moved in, I was home alone with my sister. She was in her room on the second floor. I was whistling the national anthem on the first floor when I heard a deep, male-sounding voice hum along the second floor. The humming was loud enough for me to hear over my whistling. My sister came out of her room because she heard it too. We freaked out, but eventually got over that. Fast forward a few weeks later, and every friend we had over asked us, my sister and I, when we got a cat. We didn't have a cat at that time. They all described this as a black cat that ran away when approached. My sister and I never saw this cat. A few months after that, my friends and I had a sleepover in the finished basement. In the middle of the night, the computer started blasting music. My friends and I all freaked out because A, that's a terrible way to wake up, and B, we knew we definitely turned it off before we went to sleep. One more example is my sister kept hearing knocking on her bedroom wall. Sometimes we would knock back, and the knocking would continue. It's been a while since anything has happened. Most of this occurred during the first 2 years we lived at this house. Do you think whatever spirits live here are more comfortable with us now? Do you think it's a good idea to try to communicate with whatever is at this house? On May 9th of this year, I went to a flea market to browse. I passed by a clear cabinet that held an assortment of old antique dolls, and I was particularly drawn to an old, cracked doll wearing a hat with feathers. As I examined her closer, I noticed that she had a cloth body, but her arms, head, and legs were made of the same type of plastic, or possibly porcelain. I felt very drawn to her and was surprised by her price, only $35. She wasn't in very good condition, and was clearly ancient based on the cracks on her body and the way that her face is painted on. I returned to the cashier with the doll, and immediately the workers who had been deep in conversation halted and fell quiet. They proceeded to tell me a little more about the doll, who supposedly hexes anyone who inconveniences her. This only made me feel more inclined to purchase her, as someone who is very interested in the paranormal, and as it is part of my faith, Wicca. So I ended up buying her. My younger sister, 11, wasn't very happy that I had bought the doll, whose name was Madame Leonora. She felt very thrown off by the doll's presence and requested that the doll be placed in the trunk on the ride home. I didn't want to upset the doll in case I got hexed, but my parents insisted that I put the doll in the trunk. So I did. That same day, I almost went to the hospital after an accident at my home. Similar disturbing events happened around the home whenever someone insulted Madame or did something she didn't like. These events pose a possible trauma trigger for some people, so I won't specify what the events were here. Just know that they were serious, and they were awful. I began giving Madame gifts and saying good morning and good night to her every day. On the first day that I gave her a gift, a package that I hadn't been expecting for another 2 weeks came in the mail. Every time I give her a gift, she gives me good luck. Madame and I had formed a friendship, but towards late June I began having strange, very specific dreams. In these dreams, Madame would climb down off of the shelf where she lives and escort me outside. We'd light candles and perform a ritual, and then I would bury Madame in a box with the gifts that I had given her over the months. As soon as the dream ends, I wake up. So, with the knowledge that I have because of my Wiccan faith, I decided to hold a seance of sorts in order to communicate with the spirit hosting my doll. I lit a candle and used a pendulum with a board to communicate. The candle flame responded to everything I said, and I have never seen such clear responses through my pendulum before. Based on what I got out of the session, Madame was able to tell me that she would like to be buried, but won't reveal to me why. I've never sensed any negative energy around Madame before, but with each passing day, the air in my room feels heavier, if that makes any sense. I'd like to fulfill her wish and bury her because I think she may be a Victorian mourning doll, but the vendors who sold her have no information on her at all, only that she makes bad things happen. If she is indeed a Victorian mourning doll, it would make sense why she wants to be buried. The only problem is that she refuses to tell me why I have to bury her. If anyone can tell me if there's any danger to burying her, if there's anything I should know about this, or what I can do to identify what time period she's from, I'd really appreciate the help. I live in this old house, and our closest neighbors are 10 minutes away. It may not be paranormal, seeing that nobody died or anything, but some really weird stuff has been happening lately. One time I was so sick that I had to skip school, but my parents still had to drop off my siblings, so I had to be home alone until they came back. On the second day of this happening, my parents were already gone, so I had the house to myself. I decided to make myself some breakfast first, but when I went into the kitchen, the medicine cupboard had everything thrown on the floor. The weird part was that it was locked. I phoned my mom asking if she had left it open, but she said she didn't touch the cupboard, and my dad said the same thing. I shrugged it off, thinking it was one of my siblings, and had my breakfast. I started texting my friend about what had happened when I heard a crash coming from upstairs. I tried to go upstairs, but I heard a knock on the door. I woke up late, so I wasn't that surprised to see my parents. After letting them in, I went upstairs to see what the crash was, and I saw that my sister's drone was on the floor. It was on the other side of where it was in the first place, so I was getting a little confused. I just went back downstairs and got on my phone for a bit. My parents left again a little while later to pick up my siblings. When they returned with them, I told my sister about the drone, and she didn't believe me. In the middle of the night, when I was half asleep, I heard a giggle from upstairs. In only 5 seconds, it turned into a maniacal laugh. I took my sleepy ass upstairs to tell my sister to shut the hell up, because it was a girl's voice. She told me that she was asleep and heard it from her cupboard. She got a golf club, and I got a bat, and we both carefully opened the door. Nobody was there, but we saw that all the clothes in the cupboard were off of their hangers. She decided to sleep with me for the night. It's a week later now, and I'm still creeped out. I would like to share my recent experience. This is absolutely true and in no way fabricated. I have been shaken up immensely, and my perspective on reality has definitely changed. I live in India, and my family is Protestant Christian. My upbringing and the things taught to me in terms of faith have included an aspect of the supernatural and the spiritual. Though it was always told to me that demons and spirits of darkness exist, I was always a skeptic. I believed in proof, evidence, and logic. In my opinion, exorcisms were staged and everything about it was fake, until I had what seems to be my own personal experience with the demonic. This happened about a week ago. I was on my bed, playing a racing game on my phone at 2 a.m. The lights were off, and the only light was that of my phone. I usually put my AirPods on and keep my volume on full as I enjoyed the loud engine revving sounds of the game. I started feeling an ache in my back, and this made me think I was having another bout of kidney stone pain. It runs in my family. My way of coping with it is to just ignore it and move on with things. I've had multiple stones in my body, so I have learnt to manage the discomfort well by now. As I continued with the game, I started feeling breathless as the air was heavy. It came to a point where I thought something was definitely wrong. There was a dull pain in my stomach and head too. The sounds and music of the game I was playing became very muffled and scary. I managed to pull out my headphones and lie down. I laid out on the bed, on my back, looking up at the ceiling, wondering what was going on. My wife is working abroad for now, and I really wanted to ring her. I was not able to do that, however, because somehow logic and common sense had taken a back seat at that moment. I just wasn't able to think clearly. My palms and forehead were covered in sweat, and felt crushed, like under weight of something terribly heavy. I honestly thought I was about to die. My mom had visited me in March of this year and has not been able to since leave and head back to her own house due to the lockdown. So she was sleeping in the guest room and usually fast asleep at that hour. My mom is a very deep sleeper and rarely gets up for anything in the night. During all this madness that I was going through, she just woke up and came to my door and knocked. I heard the knocks, and I wanted to say, "Please come in and help me," but my mind was too confused to do anything. She heard some groaning-like sounds coming from me and decided to let herself in. When I looked at her, I wanted to say help, but apparently I kept saying, "Just let me be. Let me die in peace." My mom told me this later. When she saw me in the state that I was, without any hesitation, she touched my head and said, "In the name of Yeshua, I bind you, rebuke you, and cast you out." I felt the immediate sensation of wanting to puke. I rushed to the loo and did so. Instantly, I felt better, and my mind began working correctly. I could think straight and had no trouble breathing. The whole recovery didn't take more than a couple of minutes. While I know that this can be dismissed as a simple case of indigestion or acidity, food poisoning, or even an anxiety attack, here are some reasons why it's got to be more. 1. The probability of my mom walking in that time was very low. Later, when I asked her why she came in at that hour, she simply said, "Because I felt like I should," like a prompting in my spirit. 2. Why would I say things like, just let me die? Any person in need of medical attention will cry for help rather than wanting to be left alone. 3. Why did I need to puke just after my mom said those words? 4. I had eaten dinner at 5 p.m. If it had something to do with that, why would it surface at 2 in the morning the next day? And 5. About a month before all this happened, I had a nightmare about an entity in my room. Something that looked like a black being with red eyes and teeth like a wolf, grinding its teeth at me or making low-pitched growls. I was scared after that, but I had dismissed it and moved on. I am really beginning to think that what I went through was a spiritual demonic oppression, which retreated due to the compulsion from a higher spiritual authority. Most of this stuff happened to me between the ages of 10 and 18. I've posted before about my haunted school, and I'd like to share more of what I've heard. Whatever these things are, they have really enjoyed screwing with me periodically. I was 17 and had just gotten home from some event, either with a church group or some friends, I don't recall. It was about 11 p.m., and as mandated, I woke my parents up to let them know that I was home and alive. Don't remember why I felt the need to shower that night, but I did. The shower was a stall with a glass door and really high-pressure steam, which was almost deafening in that plastic stall. You would have to shout at me right next to the bathroom door in order for me to hear you, so that's why what happened next was so shocking. Mid-shower, there was this loud, blood-curdling female scream that I could hear from inside the shower. I had never heard someone scream like that in real life, and it paralyzed me for a second. I have 2 sisters, and so I immediately thought the worst. I busted out of the shower, ran to my parents' room dripping wet, wearing only a towel, fully expecting my parents to be getting up to see who was screaming. The house wasn't that big, just a double-wide trailer with an addition. I was shocked to find them in bed asleep still. Their door was open. If I heard the scream, then they should have really heard it, especially since neither of them are heavy sleepers. I woke them quickly and asked if they had heard that scream, which they didn't. Mom was concerned and Dad hopped out of bed and we checked on my siblings. All sound asleep. So then we searched the house and even looked outside. Nothing. He usually gets annoyed and upset when I talk about the paranormal. He had to exorcise some evil spirit from a room when he was on his mission at age 20, so he prefers to have them just not exist at our house at all, and no scary movies. But this time he was pretty calm, probably because he could tell how upset that I was. I wasn't dreaming, hallucinating, or making it up, and he knew it. I was standing naked with a towel, nearly hyperventilating and still dripping from the shower. Dad tried to comfort me, telling me it was probably just a cat outside. Yeah, really. He didn't believe it, but that's what he was selling, so I better buy it. I really had nothing else to do but go to bed, down in the basement where most of the activity occurred, but you bet your butt I didn't sleep much. Whatever it was that was screaming would bug me periodically. I was the only one in the basement, so naturally, I was the only witness. I have lots of stories that my family still won't believe. At the time of this story, I was a 16-year-old high school student. I got a babysitting job for a couple who had a family wedding and needed a babysitter for a super late night. I was referred to them by another family that I used to sit for. Keep in mind, this was when cell phones were just coming out, so I had a really crappy flip phone with a certain amount of minutes. There were 3 kids. The oldest was a boy about 8, the middle boy was about 6, and there was a little girl who was a toddler in diapers and couldn't speak. I came in while the sun was still up to meet the kids while the parents were still there. The parents were so cool. They showed me where all the snacks were and gave me the ground rules for the night. Kids in bed by 7:30, teeth brushed, you know the drill. Once they left, we started eating dinner. To my shock, the middle child, who we'll call Teddy, kept throwing his fork hard at his siblings and pinching his sister with his nails under the table. He kept kicking my shins and throwing his food around the room. The moment his parents left, he became a terror. Their house was old but remodeled, so their toys were in the basement playroom. After dinner, we all went in there to play. As soon as we went down the stairs, it felt wrong. Don't get it twisted. It was a beautiful finished basement with a couch, flat screen, and toys, but something just felt creepy about it. Then the little girl kept pointing at a blank wall, one with no pictures or anything on it, and kept screaming at the top of her lungs and crying. It really unnerved me. At this point, I'm getting a terrible, really bad feeling, so I say let's go upstairs and watch TV till bedtime. The kids seem to love that idea. So I carry the little girl upstairs and turn on the TV for the 3 of them and then go back down to grab her favorite stuffed dog and clean up a bit. When I turn around to walk upstairs, I see Teddy smiling a sickening smile at the top of the stairs. He has his hands on the light switch. My stomach dropped. I didn't have my phone or a light. And if this little shit locks me down here, I thought. The light switch is at the top of the stairs outside the stairway, so if he closed the door, I was screwed. And sure enough, he flicked off the lights, cackled, and went to slam the door and lock me in the dark basement. I have never moved so fast in my existence. I flew up the stairs and shoved my hand into the door to keep him from locking me down there. I asked him why he did that and yelled at him to never do that again. All he did was smile at me and then slowly walk away, giggling. I iced my hand and watched him closely for the rest of the night. Bedtime comes around, and I put the kids to bed upstairs without any problems. There were 3 bedrooms, the parents' room at the end of the long hall, then the baby girl's room in the middle, and the boys shared a room with the bunk bed at the end of the hall by the top of the stairs. Everything finally seemed quiet, and I began to forget the horrors from earlier and started watching TV. About an hour after I put her down, the baby girl started screaming through the baby monitor. A scream that sounded like she was in pain. Thinking her brother Teddy was bothering her, I ran upstairs to stop him. As soon as I get to the top of the stairs, I see him laying down on his bed facing the wall. The baby is hysterical and is again pointing at nothing and crying. I am freaked out by now. I rock the baby back to sleep, check on the boys, then return to the living room. What the hell is happening? Am I imagining things? I shake it off and turn the TV back on. This is when the night goes from bad to a total nightmare. Once back in the living room, I start to hear screaming every couple minutes. What sounds this time like a grown man screaming in pain. At first I thought it was outside or maybe a TV or a radio, so I ignored it and kept watching television. But soon it became clear that it wasn't a joke and it wasn't my imagination. It was coming from inside the house. Then, I hear what sounds like little feet running upstairs in the hallway. For a second, I'm not scared anymore. I'm angry that Teddy's out of bed 2+ hours after bedtime. I go to the bottom of the stairs and holler up Teddy's name and tell him to go back to sleep. I don't hear a response, but I do hear the footsteps continue. Then I hear what I think is him run into his parents' room at the other end of the hall. Feet pounding down the hallway, clear as day. So I sprint up there, thinking I've caught him in the act. The hall is empty and dark. I turn, and I find Teddy is sitting up in his bed. He's staring at me again with that sickening smile. I could see his brother was asleep on the top bunk, and I could see that his baby sister was asleep on the monitor in my hand. He gave me the creeps. I told him to lay back down. I go back downstairs to the middle floor. I then hear someone walking up from the basement, and I lost it. I slammed and locked the basement door, and I called my house number. My big brother answers, and I tell him that I'm scared. He puts me on speaker, and I explain everything to my family. I babysit every weekend, and I've never had a negative experience or called them like this, so luckily they believed me. My grandpa, being a super religious man, prayed with me and calmed me down. My big brother got into his car and came to sit with me until the parents got home, but the town I was in was a bit of a drive, so he told me he'd be there in 40 minutes. Even after we hung up, I could hear the footsteps running around the house. I am not a religious person, but I sat on the couch and prayed and cried. I have never been so scared in my life. I was terrified. The parents came home before my brother got there, and they saw that I had been crying. They asked what happened, and I told them everything non-supernatural that occurred because I didn't want them to think I was a crazy person or tell people not to hire me. I just wasn't going to mention it at all. So I just said Teddy was a handful, and that was it. As I was leaving, the dad, in a deadly serious voice, said, "Did the ghost bother you?" I slowly turned to him, not fully believing what I had just heard. I asked him if he was being serious. He said, "Oh, I'm being serious. We've had a ghost problem for a while now. Did you experience anything yourself?" I broke down and started crying when I gave them an honest recap of the night. I told them about the screams that I heard, the footsteps, everything. How the baby was crying at the wall, and how Teddy tried locking me in the basement. They believed me right away. The parents said they'd moved into the house about 2 years ago after the old man who built the house died inside of it. He was an actual hoarder and fell and injured himself in the basement and died among his piles. Since no one could hear him scream, they didn't find him in time. By all accounts from the neighborhood, he was a mean recluse of a man. Either way, what a terrible way to go. They said they would wake up every night to things flying off of their kitchen counters and doors slamming. They would hear knocks and pounding in the walls. I was shocked. I asked why they stayed in the house if they knew it was haunted. They explained they weren't able to move due to their jobs and current financial situation. I have to admit that although it wasn't huge, it was a beautifully built home. That old construction kind of home with bookshelves built into the walls and a winding grand staircase. The dad said he would go downstairs every night for a year and say, "Go away. This is our home now. You aren't welcome here," over and over. He said eventually the activity stopped. They said it only sparked up when someone new would stay in the house or when they'd have a sitter at night. They said since I quote-unquote knew the truth now, that they would pay me extra to come back because they could never keep a babysitter. Yeah, right, I thought. I am never going back there. But I said I'd be in touch, and I ran out of that house. I am ashamed to say that I never answered their calls again. I felt bad, but there was no way in hell I'd ever return there. I still babysit once in a while, and I've never had any experience like that since. I still think of those kids sometimes, and I really think that Teddy was being affected by the spirit there. I've never encountered a child so cruel, so negative. Thinking of his creepy little smile still sends a chill down my back. I hope they were able to move or clear the negative energy. Either way, it's one night I won't forget. So this was quite a while back, when I was around 12 or 13. I am now 17. My dad lived in a different house from me and my mom, and he was finally settling in. I was staying over for the night on the weekend, as I would regularly do. We both acknowledged that the kitchen was weirdly designed, and by that I mean that the counters were placed in odd places, so you'd have to walk around them, kind of like you were in a maze, with the fridge right at the end, that would then lead into a garage, if that makes sense. Whenever I would stay, I would always feel odd and on edge for some reason. I could never get comfortable and relax. I always felt as if I was being watched of some sort. Even thinking about it now, I get a weird feeling through my body. The room I stayed in had a double bed, red walls, a walk-in closet, and a mirror going from the floor to the ceiling. Just a normal room. But for whatever reason, that's the room I would feel uneasy in, like something was in there with me. I never said anything, though, because I was only young and thought it was just me. I hated sleeping in there on my own, and would always be scared to open my eyes at nighttime in case I would see something. My dad also had a double bed, but both beds were already in the house when he bought it. The spare room had a single bed in there, but I don't remember much of it as I hardly went in there. But while we lived there, he said nothing about seeing or feeling anything unusual. Fair enough. He's an extremely laid-back, chilled person, so even if he had, he'd have brushed it off no problem. And while I was visiting, I never experienced seeing anything. Just feeling uncomfortable and on edge all the time. However, about a year once he'd moved out, I was staying with him and his now fiancée and her child. I'll name her child S. And at the time she was around 7 or 8, so still quite young. We had to go over to his old place, as he had tenants living there that needed their bath sorted out. They had kids of their own, so me and S would end up playing with them to keep ourselves company. Normal stuff. I still felt the exact same feeling I had when I used to stay there before. So by the time we were leaving, we were all standing in the hallway waiting to leave with the stairs to our left. As soon as we went through the door, the stairs were right in front of you or a doorway to the left to go into the bottom floor of the house. While the adults were chatting, I noticed a dark, gray figure move across the top of the stairs and go into my old room. I'll admit, it made me freeze for a second, and I looked down at S and asked her if she had seen it too. She said she had, and we both just looked at each other and back up the stairs. I was a major wussbag back then, so I didn't go upstairs to look, but I know I wouldn't have seen anything anyway. If it was something paranormal, they never show up when you want them to or on command. But I kept staring upstairs until the adults stopped talking and my dad told us it was time to leave. When we got in the car, we were quietly talking about it to each other. It's nothing extreme, and it could have been nothing at all. But considering 2 people had seen it, I feel like maybe it was actually something. My family and I lived at a large property called Gladstone Villa in the former mining town of Bargode. in the Caerphilly County Borough of the South Wales Valleys in the UK. From 1969 to 1978, we experienced activity that simply defied rational explanation, such as lights going off and on. We witnessed electrical cables being pulled, and my grandfather Bill claimed to have had a glass bottle thrown towards him as he entered the main bedroom, missing him by inches. I didn't personally see this myself, but I still recall the time he came from there with the broken bottle in his hands, and he told us what happened. There was the occasional sighting, but this was very rare indeed, so rare that in all the 9 years I was there, I never once saw it, but I did hear it many times in the bedroom. It's still worth mentioning that my mother, Caroline, saw it on at least 2 occasions. There were also regular footsteps heard in the main bedroom every evening. Sometimes during the day we'd all be downstairs watching TV. One of us would turn the volume down to hear it more clearly, and my grandfather Bill would point to the ceiling and say, "He's by there," or "He's by there now," trying to make out where the footsteps were coming from exactly. There were 5 members of the family that were living at the Gladstone Villa. My maternal grandfather was William Higgs, known as Bill to family and friends, a retired miner who worked at the local colliery. He was a short, bald man who liked nothing more than to listen to his country and western LPs, Johnny Cash, Glen Campbell, and so on. He also liked westerns on TV that starred John Wayne or Clint Eastwood. My maternal grandmother was Rita Higgs. She was a short woman who was a housewife. She was completely teetotal, but liked to smoke. She also liked collecting garden gnomes and liked watching soap operas on TV. My mother, Caroline Dexter, met my father at the local bakehouse on Baldwin Street. She was day shift regularly, and my father worked the night shift. He would stay behind to make her a cup of tea and chat. They dated for 3 years before they got married on Monday, the 1st of April, 1968. The Beatles were number 1 with Lady Madonna. They did not get a place of their own, but they decided to live with my grandparents at Gladstone Villa, which was in Cardiff Road. I was born on August 24th, 1969, when everyone was listening to the latest number 1 in the charts, Honky Tonk Woman by the Rolling Stones. It was soon after that my mother said that strange things started to happen. I was just a baby when she said it all started off rather quietly, like small tapping here and there, but nothing too noticeable. But in time, the activity gradually increased. One time my mother said the family heard a noise like someone jumping down from the attic and onto the landing. Naturally thinking that someone was trying to break in, they went to see what was going on. When they got there, they found no one, but the latch to the attic was open. Whatever it was eventually occupied itself in the main bedroom, which incidentally was my grandparents' room. It soon made its presence felt by walking around the bedroom, and the sounds of dragging could be heard. One day, my mother went upstairs to that bedroom to get my father up for work so he could be ready for his night shift. When she got there, she was confronted by the sight of the ironing board placed on my father's torso as he slept. When he awoke, he was astonished to find the situation he was in. He suspected my grandfather Bill was playing pranks, but in time he knew my grandfather was not responsible for it, and he told his work friends what was going on, and it got around town that Gladstone Villa was haunted. My parents separated in 1972 and my father left Gladstone Villa, but it wasn't because of what was going on at the villa. It was just a breakdown of the marriage. They finally divorced on the 25th of April, 1975. The British band the Bay City Rollers were number 1 in the charts with Bye Bye Bay. Again, very apt. It would have been amusing but for the fact of what was going on there. I was barely 2 years old, so I have no memory of my father living at the villa, but he would come to see me every Saturday to take me to see my paternal grandparents and to the local cinema. Great times, even though the paranormal activity still continued. As I got older, too, I witnessed the activity for myself. I actually saw the poltergeist activity. I watched electrical cables being pulled by unseen forces. I saw the lights going on and off, and when my grandfather Bill would play records on Sunday as the family did dinner, it would turn the music off. It took exception to the British band Slade and any religious TV shows my grandmother Rita would watch. The local police were also involved. I remember them popping their heads into the attic, hesitating and not going in, but they suggested it was my father playing a prank on the family. A family friend, Mrs. Ivy France, she was more of a friend to my grandmother Rita, she was very skeptical when my grandmother told her that Gladstone Villa was haunted. I can remember Ivy going into the main bedroom, looking around and saying it was vibration from the traffic outside causing it, but she was soon to change her mind when she experienced it for herself. It was then she suggested that the local press be contacted, and a medium. The medium was John Matthews, and when he came to Gladstone Villa, he started by asking the family questions. He then began by challenging the spirit to perform by knocking on the ceiling, and sure enough, it responded by knocking back at him. At some point, John went into a trance to try to make contact with it, but he failed to get a name. He later confirmed the obvious, that there was indeed a presence there, and that it was an earthbound spirit, and that it had unfinished business. A priest by the name of Graham Jones was then called to Gladstone Villa. He blessed the property, and after a few prayers, he duly left, and it was quiet for a few short months after that. No incidents. But it did return, and with a vengeance, and this time it decided to show itself. One evening, my grandfather Bill, my mother Caroline, and I were watching television. My grandmother Rita was reading a book, when all of a sudden my mother just so happened to look to her left, and she saw a full, solid figure of a monk standing by the doorway. We did not see this, as we were otherwise occupied, but she later described it in detail as a monk in typical brown habit, complete with hood over the head so she didn't see the face. It sounded very much like a 16th century Benedictine monk. Fred Davies was a friend of my grandfather Bill. They worked together at the local colliery, and he would visit most evenings. Fred was a slim man who would wear a flat cap and glasses and smoked homemade cigarettes that hung from his lips as he spoke. He would sit in his favorite chair by the open fire and talk to the family and watch TV with us. One day, Fred was with us, in his casual place by the open fire. I was quietly playing with my toys by the sideboard. It was tranquil, when all of a sudden there was one very loud bang. It was so loud that Fred ducked his head and I ran to my mother for comfort. When it was gone, we all went upstairs. My grandfather, Bill, would always be the first and I would be the last. When we went to that bedroom, we found nothing that could account for that noise. Fred later told us that he ducked his head as he thought it was going to come through the ceiling. Fred told us of another experience he had at Gladstone Villa. My grandfather Bill liked to look out the landing window that overlooked Cardiff Road and into the Bargoed town centre. This time Fred joined him, and he said that he felt something brush past him, but when he looked, there was nothing there. The most frightening experience I had was when I was alone in that particular bedroom. I made sure the light was on. It was very quiet as usual. I was lying on the bed facing the window that overlooked Cardiff Road when I suddenly felt something heavy pounce on the bottom of the bed. I heard the bed springs go just once, and I felt the bed bounce. I didn't look straight away, but when I did, there was nothing there. I went downstairs to tell my family, and we all went back up. We saw distinctive paw marks on the bed, like that of an animal. I later found out that my grandfather had a black Labrador dog called Tovey who died before I was born. My grandfather Bill and my mother Caroline claimed to have heard a baby crying there, but as I didn't hear it at the time, I took very little notice of what they said. The activity got so bad that my mother, grandmother, and I slept downstairs with the lights on. It was only my grandfather Bill who was supposedly brave enough to sleep in the bedroom itself. It was then that he himself had yet another experience. He told us that he was lying on the bed when all of a sudden he couldn't move. He couldn't even shout for us to help him. This could well have been sleep paralysis, but he said that he heard something in the room with him. My grandmother Rita had her own experiences. One day she went upstairs into that room to get my grandfather up when she saw the boiler door open wide by itself. She didn't stay there to see what it was, but she rushed out. Another occasion, she said that she had the sense of something pulling from under her foot, as if she had stepped on someone's gown. We had the ghost for so long that my grandmother Rita gave it a pet name. She called him Johnny, and my grandfather Bill would shout out that name to provoke a reaction, but nothing would happen. Ivy Francis's son, Charles, got to hear about what was going on at the Gladstone Villa, and he came along with some friends, and with my family's permission, they went into the bedroom. It frightened one of his friends, and to this day, his friend still says that it is a spooky place. My mother Caroline had an operation on her and ended up on crutches. The local nurse would tend to her foot. One day she was sitting on a chair when the nurse came, and the nurse knelt down to tend to her, and she told my mother not to hold her. My mother looked at my grandmother Rita in amazement, as she was not holding the nurse at all. My mother made her own conclusions that it was Johnny the ghost that was holding her, so as not for the nurse to hurt her. The only time I heard the ghost being vocal was the time that we were all in the room. One of us wanted to use the bathroom and we couldn't get in there. My grandfather Bill said, "He's behind there." I heard quite distinctively the sound of a Gregorian chant, and that was it. Nothing more. We left in the summer of 1978, when two local businessmen bought the property, and Gladstone Villa was eventually converted into a small hotel and its name changed to Reds Park Hotel. On the night before we moved, there was one final incident that we experienced, as if it knew that we were going, and that was its way of saying goodbye. My mother, grandmother, and I got ready to go to sleep. The light was still on, and then we heard the doorknob turning as if someone were trying to get in. At first, I naturally suspected my grandfather Bill, as he was the only one who slept upstairs in that room, and we thought it may have been him playing a prank. I called out to him, but there was no answer, no laugh that would give him away. We then heard our belongings that were packed in the hallway being thrown around. The next day, we asked my grandfather Bill if it was him playing a joke on us. He insisted that it wasn't him, and to this very day, I believe him. I had my 40th birthday at Reds Park Hotel in August of 2009 for old time's sake, and it was the female staff that told me about the ghost, and I told them what had happened to me there 30 years before. The staff told me of their own personal experiences, lights going off and on, the odd sighting in a room, a bridge, a bride in white was seen. Again, as with the claims of the baby crying that made no sense to me at the time. I did a thorough research of the property in the Cardiff Road area, and I found out some very interesting things indeed. I found out from the Bargood Library and the local newspaper archives that Gladstone Villa dates back to 1900, and it was named after the former British Prime Minister William Gladstone. I discovered the previous people that lived there. The Kimyett family in 1924. The new married couple Michael and Evelyn Kimyett, and a son named Elvin. He died at the property at just 4 months old, according to the archives of Cardiff newspaper The Western Mail of that year. This explained the baby my mother and grandfather had heard in that bedroom so long ago. Mrs. Evelyn Kimmiott died in 1970, soon after I was born. Maybe this is why all the activity started. I also found that there was a monastery in Baldwin Street, where my parents met and worked, and there's a property directly opposite the former Gladstone Villa property in Cardiff Road dating back to the 16th century. It is now a public house called the Rafa Club. A priest hide is said to be there, but it's sealed up. This explains the monk that my mother saw. What I have said here is true. I wouldn't share this if I couldn't possibly back this up, and I have used real names, as I have nothing to hide, and all I have said can be verified by the family of those people that I mentioned. Sadly, some of the people I've mentioned are no longer with us. I challenge any hardened skeptic and firm non-believer, and I can assure them that they will indeed most certainly question their belief system. Of this I have no doubt at all whatsoever. In fact, I am 100% positive. I was 15 when the first time anything paranormal happened to me at this boarding school. For a month, I would have sleep paralysis. The next month, it got 10 times worse. As well as sleep paralysis, I would feel someone or something patting my head. I would open my eyes, and no one was there. This would carry on for a little while, until one night when I had sleep paralysis again and I looked over to the other side of the room and saw a slightly washed out figure of a woman wearing a maid's costume. This happened for a couple more nights until I left that school. I came back to that school for sixth form, the last 2 years of high school if you're American. It all started up again when I was moved into that same dorm, but this time she followed me around the school. In the end, I prayed for her. However, she still follows me around when I wear a certain necklace to this day. The last story I have is about 18-year-old me messing around with a Ouija board. Please don't do this. So my boyfriend at the time was the one who bought the Ouija board. A good friend had just died a couple of months ago. We messed around with it for a little bit until the planchette started to levitate. I somehow went into a trance for what felt like about 30 seconds. However, I got told it was for 5 minutes. When I came out of this trance, I had 3 scratches down my arm. The hand with scratches was red hot to the touch, but the other was ice cold. Of course, we decided to do it again the next night. Something predicted the future. The first thing it said was fire alarm. The next thing was knee surgery. And the last was asylum. As soon as this happened, the fire alarm went off. A year later, I had knee surgery. And then 6 months later, my ex was admitted to a mental facility. I know this sounds far-fetched, but this is what happened. Again, please don't mess around with Ouija boards. If you live in North Carolina, then you've heard of Gravity Hill. You can look it up to get information about it. One night it was me, my boyfriend, and 3 of his cousins, and we thought it would be fun to drive out to Gravity Hill and test it for ourselves. Something did, in fact, push us up the hill. Cody's car was in neutral, but something did push us up. And as we got to the top, Cody asks us if we want to go to the house. I asked what it was, and all 4 of them said, in sync, that I had to see it for myself. We drove up there, and as we got to it, it's this very old, abandoned white house. I'd say it was probably built in the late 40s, early 50s, but no one's lived in it for years. I asked him to pull into the driveway, and he did. We sat there for a minute. I wanted to see if anything would happen because I didn't believe them. We were in the driveway for 3 minutes at most when Cody said, "I'm about ready to leave. What about y'all?" As soon as he said that, his headlights dimmed so much we thought they went out. I saw someone in the upstairs window only for a second, but someone or something was standing there watching us. It frightened me so much that it brought tears to my eyes and I was shaking. We sped off and didn't look back. I still remember the feeling of all my energy leaving my body, and I never want to experience something like that ever again. While I was growing up, around the age of 3 until 6 or 7, I had an invisible friend. He would only show up every once in a while. I thought maybe he was lonely and also needed a friend. I disliked the feeling of someone not having a friend when I was little, so I gently worked hard to be his friend, just so that he would have someone. Usually he would appear whenever my stepmom would be mean to us, and we were left alone for a bit afterward, or when I was scared or was having a paranormal experience which at the time I didn't understand. My teacher was fond of me and told my dad that I was special and could grow into either a very bad or a very good person. While the other kids would play on the playground together, I would sit on the hill and just enjoy the grass and trees and wind, and my teacher would sit down next to me, enjoying it in silence as well. I remember one time the other kids were on the playground and, without being told to, stopped playing and sat down with us, and we all just sat on the hill enjoying the breeze. It was a pretty nice memory, just all of us enjoying the silence and having a moment, until the school bell rang. My dad didn't think that the little boy was fake, while my stepmom tried to get me to see a specialist. My dad did eventually take me to a specialist in order to make my stepmom happy because they constantly argued about it. I remember that at our last appointment I was in the waiting room. My dad opened the door and went into her office, and I remember as my dad's back was turned to me that the specialist concluded that nothing was wrong with me, that I was just a normal kid. My dad said something along the lines of, "I thought so, thank you," and he took me out for ice cream afterward. My dad later opened up to me after his divorce and said that in every generation some of the kids have gifts and that some people don't like what they can't understand, and that's why he thought my old friend wasn't made up. To this day, I don't know if he was a ghost or an invisible friend I made up as a little girl, but I do remember that he had his own personality that I was not in control of. He never really talked about anything, like about his life, even if I asked him questions. He just wanted to play, or he would show up and say, "It's going to be okay." I remember after a while, as my stepmom hated it more and more, he sort of slowly went away. Sometimes I would call out for him, which I didn't do before, and he wouldn't show up. Sometimes when I would cry, I would sort of wait for him, hoping a little bit that he would show up. But he never did. I eventually forgot about the little boy until one day in middle school. It felt like something which was not very good was in my bedroom with me that night. The house was oddly quiet. I figured I was being silly, so I fell asleep. That night, I had a dream that I was inside of a broken-down city as a girl again. It was a misty night with puddles on the road. I could even feel the rain falling lightly on my skin. I remember that my hair was wet. The city seemed to be empty. The street lights looked old, and there weren't any lights on anywhere. Many of the building's windows were broken. Inside of the rooms were dusty and unkept. I also noticed that there wasn't any furniture inside of them or lights or doors. It was just rooms. I called out, and my voice kind of echoed as the rain tapped the ground. I noticed rather quickly that I wasn't alone. Something heard me. As a figure of something slowly crept in the distance on the street behind me, I looked closer, but it wasn't a person. I heard a loud screech, and I instantly started to run as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Whatever was inhabiting that city wasn't expecting me. Suddenly, I was being chased by a bunch of shadowy, semi-human-looking things. They ran fast and would jump from the wall of one building to another building, clinging onto the sides, the bricks falling and hitting the streets and the sidewalks behind me. They nearly caught up to me until I turned the corner and started to run over to an old wooden fence on the outskirts of the city. I felt the water on the grass, and I think I slipped at least once. I saw the little boy on the other side of the dark brown, worn-down fence, and he said, "Take my hand." I did, and as we ran away through an open field in an attempt to reach some woods on the other side, those things were moments away from catching us. Their claws dug into the ground. Some of the speckles of dirt flew past my face. Then I woke up. On my ceiling above my bed there was a huge man in armor and medium-length brown hair. His hair moved and little parts of his clothes moved with it, as if they were submerged. But it didn't look to me like he had been near water. He had a silk cloth. It was either red or purple. The only way I remember it is because part of it had floated steady near his hair and face. Light seemed to emit not only from his body but from underneath his skin as well. As I looked at his face, he had an expression of warmth and calm, and it felt like we knew each other. He seemed so familiar. Only the area from the top of his head until about his waist or a little below it could fit within the space of my ceiling. I remember his eyes. It was like he were trying to tell me something. That he was the little boy the entire time, and it was going to be okay. The only way that I can describe the feeling of familiarity I had is, you know the feeling when you see someone after a while, and you realize you knew each other when you were kids? Eventually, after what felt like a longer time than what it probably was, the man faded away, and it was just me in my empty room. That morning when I went upstairs to fix myself some breakfast, my uncle was talking in the living room about having a dream. I didn't really catch what his dream was about, though, until he mentioned that he woke up in the middle of the night when he heard aggressive scratching and banging on his door. My dad didn't believe him, so he brought my dad and my sister and I downstairs to show us that it was true, to show my dad that he wasn't making it up. There were long, deep scratches on the other side of his bedroom door from the hallway. I can't explain what happened or what had made those scratch marks. I usually don't open up about my experiences. I honestly haven't had the courage to until a few days ago. Rarely have I shared them. I still haven't told my family about my dream, or the man I had seen either. But they still talk about the scratches. I've had several unexplained encounters which I guess you could say are paranormal. I've never believed in that kind of stuff until the experience that I'm going to tell you now. There's a creek below my house where me and my friend would go to hang out when we were kids. It was away from everyone, where we could do whatever we wanted to. We'd normally build a fire and just chill and bring a radio so that we could listen to music. One day I decided that we should go fishing since we never have down there and there's a bunch of deep spots that are perfect for it. So I get my grandpa's old fishing rod. It was literally a piece of bamboo with a fishing line tied to it. I don't know why, but I just wanted to test it out. He brought his dad's old fishing pole. Both my grandpa and his dad had unfortunately passed away years ago. We pack everything up and head down. We decide first to start fishing near the entrance to the creek because there's a few deep spots there. So we bait our hooks and I throw my line in and he does second. As we're waiting for a bite, my friend tells me someone is coming. I turn around and see no one, yet he says he can hear walking. I keep looking and soon I see a man coming around the corner wearing a hat and overalls. He's very dirty as well, like he just got done working on a car or something. When he sees us, he stops and stares. My friend starts freaking out and telling me to get my knife, since I always carry one. I, however, feel like he wasn't a threat, and just watched him. My friend has always been nervous around strangers and has a fear of them. He begins walking toward us without a word, and stops only a few feet away from my friend. He doesn't seem to acknowledge me and doesn't even look at me and my friend. He stares at him without uttering a word. My friend finally speaks up and says, "Can I help you?" The man simply replies, "Have you seen my wife and kids?" He also calls my friend by name. My friend replies, "No, I haven't seen anyone else down here." The man says nothing and walks away, and as he walks around the corner, I follow him, and as I look around the corner, he vanishes. I see no trace of him, and there's no place he could have gone except straight, because there's fences on both sides. I look back at my friend and tell him he's gone. My friend tells me that's not possible unless he could run extremely fast uphill. I then asked if he knew him because he called him by name, but he swears he has no idea who the man was and has never seen him before. We both decided that was enough for one day, packed everything up, and left. We never saw him again, though we've been down there hundreds of times since that incident. Not long ago, however, I stumbled upon a gravestone hidden in thick grass at the same creek. It was a man who died in the 1970s, who was also a Vietnam veteran. I've lived in a very active house for quite some time. This house is off the hook with paranormal activity. From EVPs to hundreds of orbs, there are tons of stories and photos I'll upload at some point. But since I'm a little short on time today, I just wanted to tell you a story from about 12 years ago. I was sitting in the front room of our home on the sofa reading a book. It was a nice summer day, but not too hot. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then, I got the strangest feeling. It was like that feeling you get in dreams when things look normal, but you're very aware that you're not in your normal life. It was the strangest, most surreal feeling ever. At first I was going to brush it off as being tired. However, pretty soon I was completely unable to explain it away. Everything I'm about to tell you happened more or less at the same time, within about 3 seconds, but I remember it in slow motion. First, the sofa cushion next to mine indented, and I was very aware of the fact that someone had sat next to me. I heard the clanking of a teacup and saucer, and the woman who sat beside me laughed. Obviously, I didn't know it was a woman until she laughed, but she had the softest, most calming voice. Almost at the same time, I became aware of smells like cigar smoke, teas I didn't own but that smelled lovely, and sounds like background chatter. Kind of like when you're at a church gathering or some low-key party. It wasn't loud. It was just consistent, muffled chatter with a few light bursts of laughter here and there, more clanking, some old-time music. Then the woman next to me spoke to someone who must have been on the opposite side of her from where I was sitting, based on the way it sounded, and she said, "I know, isn't she just lovely? This is so lovely." And then the voice said, in my direction, "You are just delightful." In an instant, it all went back to normal, but for the brief period of time that it was going on, I felt like I was straddling two dimensions. I didn't feel frightened at all. I felt very comforted by the experience for some reason, but at the same time, it was one of the single most bizarre incidents I've ever had. Not the scariest or most dramatic, but definitely one of the most surreal. This just happened about 30 minutes ago. I was in the kitchen, and as I turned around, the very strong scent of my mom's distinct perfume hit me in the face. This happened 3 times. Now, my mother had an unusual mix of perfumes she used to wear, and was known to wear a lot of it. Also, she had a hint of air fresheners that she also had a lot of in her house. Mom passed away over 2 years ago and had never been to this house. We've only lived here 18 months. And we don't have anything here that smells the same as that. It was so strong and so distinct that my heart immediately pounded and I shouted to my partner, "I can smell my mother." I thought I saw something climb the stairs earlier today too, but passed it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. Now, I think there may be more to it. I've had a few paranormal experiences in my lifetime. My mom and dad said that when I was little, they would wake up in the middle of the night to me crawling around my nursery and saying a man with glowing eyes was playing with me. They believed it was my grandfather who died when I was born a hallway away, but I haven't seen him since. Anyway, my boyfriend used to live in an old farmhouse built back in the late 1800s with roommates. None of them believed in activity, but I asked about the old barns in the house when I was staying there. I always felt unsettled in the house when I would sleep there and often would wake up at around 3:12 a.m. to pee. But one night I woke up at that time and stumbled down the hall to the bathroom. At the end of the hall was the staircase, which was creaky and old, and I heard it shift. I stopped at the bathroom door and saw the face of an older man peer around the corner. I jumped into the bathroom and shut the door to pee, but felt goosebumps all up my arms and my back. I didn't feel afraid of him. He looked pretty nervous, but it spooked me really bad. I went back to bed and didn't see him again. The next time I stayed there, I woke up at the same time to pee, and I saw him standing against the wall. But this time, he actually reached his hand out to me and motioned to go downstairs. I cautiously went towards him to see him go downstairs, and I peered around the corner to see him facing the door with his hands behind his back and staring at the open field in front of him. This time I noticed that he was wearing glasses and was older, with a scruffy white beard and dirty pants and boots like he'd been working outside. My boyfriend came down and found me, so I went back to bed, but didn't sleep at all. The last time I saw him, I woke up at 3:12 yet again, and rubbed my eyes to feel a really warm sensation around my hand, as though someone with really strong, working hands was grabbing me with both of their hands, but I sat up to see nothing. My heart was beating loud, but I felt safe and calm, and I swear I heard the whisper, "I'll miss you," before I went to look for him. He was in the hallway again, and he tipped his cap before whistling and walking away. I followed him, but didn't see him anywhere, and this was the last night we stayed there before we moved to a different town, into our own home. As crazy as this sounds, I miss him, and he was a sweet soul. I hope the boys that live there don't bother him too much. I asked about him after we left and visited my boyfriend's friends, and they said their grandfather had died before they were alive, and he was a working farmer whose wife died before him. He loved animals and wore big bottle glasses. I really think it was him, and that since the boys didn't believe in ghosts, that he just wanted someone to be his friend. Here is the chilling tale of one of my stepmoms, who we'll call Lisa here, experiences with ghosts that she has conjured through her old Ouija board. So Lisa had just divorced her ex-husband and was living alone in a new house with her 2 kids. She moved to get away from the torturous spirits or demons in her old house. She was settling down with a broken heart and a new life. She went to bed after forgetting to pray one night. She did this because it was what the priest told her to do to solve her problems with the paranormal. It seemed to work, she told me, but when I didn't do it, it would all come back. Lisa had no paranormal experiences while she was in that house. Until now. On the night she didn't pray. Her oldest kid was 7 and now sleeping alone. Her youngest was 3, and Lisa kept her sleeping in her room because she felt like she had to keep an eye on her. Because of all the experiences, she was a worrywart. Anyway, she falls asleep and wakes up to 3 knocks. She knows this all too well. She lit a sage, prayed, and went back to sleep. This didn't work. That night she kept hearing scratches on her wall above her head. She turns to look up and sees a face in the pitch black dark. Lisa just woke up and thought it was her imagination. But then came a feeling of impending doom. A feeling also that she knew too well. She turns on her lamp, turns around to see a black mist looming next to her bed. She grabs her daughter who is sleeping with her and grabs a Bible. She screams for the mist to go away and everything calms down. She flicks on the light, paces around the room, and looks over to where she heard the scratching sounds earlier. To her horror, she sees 3 scratch marks the size of tiger claws above her bed on the wall. The scratches were on her wall until she put up new wallpaper. I asked her stepdaughters. One of them remembers her mom screaming at a wall. She never saw what my stepmom saw, but they wondered why they saw the scratch marks. So before some of y'all say I'm making this up, it's not my responsibility to prove it. I've always felt that someone was watching me, always with me, just watching, but nobody was to be seen. It was one night during a November break after my birthday, around 2:30, when I started to feel sick, so I got up to use the bathroom. My room was in the basement right next to my parents'. I left my room, and we have this hallway. I walked down, and it was pitch black. I was going up to the door that leads to the stairs, and for a quick second, there was just a girl standing there, and then she just floated up and disappeared. I was so scared, but I really had to use the bathroom, and we only have one that was upstairs, so I continued my journey and used the bathroom. It took me about 20 minutes to get my head together, and then I went back downstairs to bed. Since I moved into this house, 3 a.m. has always been scary to me because I hear a lot of things, and my parents just think that I'm crazy. But the clock hit 3 a.m. I was already scared for my life, and I said, I'm just going to try to go to bed. I tried for about 10 minutes, and it felt like I was being watched still, so I said, Hello, is anybody there? No one answered, but a moment later my painting fell off the wall and hit the shelf that was holding my mirror, to fall and shatter. I've always had a spooky feeling about that mirror, and I was crying in fear. After I calmed down, around 3:50, I was going to bed again, and I felt a tug on my foot, but just pushed it away. After the third time, I sat up and saw the same girl from earlier. Her bright green eyes glowed, but her long, blue, scruffy dress was beautiful. It was scary, but I felt like I've seen her somewhere, or she looked really familiar to me and looked like a younger version of me. Ever since then, I haven't heard a word or peep out of anything, but I still feel her presence. I think my paranormal story began when I was around 5 or 6 years of age. I was a shy and quiet little girl, but nothing in my life was out of the ordinary. I had both of my parents married, and a little brother 3 years younger than me that was sleeping in the same room as me. I don't know exactly how or when it all began, but things started to get weird at night in my bedroom. Every time my mother put me to bed and turned off the lights, shadows would begin to move around and scare me. By shadows, I mean black entities, like little insects crawling on the walls, standing figures with human shapes, even faces. I was so terrified of the night that I had a hard time falling asleep, and I can't recount how many times I had to turn on my little bed light to chase away the shadows that I was seeing. Nothing bad ever happened to me during those days. These shadows were always just passing by or staring at me, even though I recalled some times that were scarier than others. I remembered one particular night when I opened my eyes and there was just a face, centimeters away from mine, staring at me with dead eyes. I was on top of a bunk bed. Every time something scary would happen to me, my instinct was to turn on a light. Everything disappeared with the light, so I made a habit to save myself like this. And now, at 26 years old, I still need to turn on the lights everywhere I go because I cannot feel at ease in the dark. Of course, I told my experiences to my parents at the time, but they did not really take me seriously. I was quite imaginative for my age, so they thought it was just my silly little brain making things up. At the same time, my vision was starting to get bad and I needed to wear glasses. They used to tell me my blurred vision was creating scary monsters with the things in my room. Every time I was seeing the things in my room, I kept repeating my parents' words to soothe me, but I was still so scared, trembling, and unable to sleep because of what I was seeing. I had bad sleeping habits because of that. I had hard times closing my eyes at night, and I always tried to fall asleep before there was no light left in the house. These experiences followed me my whole childhood, but with the years passing by, they were less frequent. The fear of the dark still lingered, but I could sleep more peacefully. When I reached my teenage years, it completely stopped. At times, I was even able to completely forget this part of my life. Funny how I never thought my house was haunted. I always knew deep down that it was my problem to bear. The rest of my family never had any paranormal experiences in this house, and none of them were particularly inclined to hear about my fear of the shadows. Even though I stopped seeing things after my 12th or 13th birthday, I still had quite the instinct for the paranormal, and I was able to feel if a place was bad or not. But I want to make it clear that I was not seeking paranormal thrills. In fact, I was avoiding those things like the plague. I was still very much traumatized, and I did not want to experience scary things like that ever again. So, I cannot recall if it was during my 14th or 15th birthday years, but I had my final, most horrifying encounter. I was on vacation at my friend's grandmother's house. It was quite an old house, and there were 2 beds in this bedroom for my friend and me to go to sleep. I had slept in this room many nights before without anything happening, and nothing during the evening could explain what took place next. I woke up in the middle of the night with no explanation. I don't remember having a bad dream or hearing something. I just opened my eyes in the complete darkness. The feeling of uneasiness crept in very quickly. Something was not right. I could feel it, but I wasn't sure what yet. I finally lifted my head and saw it. Words cannot describe how horrid the thing I saw was, and how terrified I felt in that instant. Just 2 meters away from me, at the end of my bed, stood a man that I can only describe as grotesque. The man had red skin, or so I thought at first, prominent eyes, and an all-teeth smile. It was standing still and staring directly at me. We looked at each other for what felt like hours with no one moving. I was able to see every detail of it. More than 10 years later, I'm able to describe it perfectly to you. Its image is still ingrained in my brain like I was marked by a hot iron. Its red skin was actually no skin at all. It was made out of muscles, and its eyes and teeth were very apparent because it had neither eyelid nor lip. Its face was horribly deformed because there were several metal pieces under its muscles that were coming out at random places. It wore a black leather trench coat. I cannot tell you how terrified that I was. My heart plummeted to my stomach and my body felt an uncomfortable hotness within. It was the first time that I was seeing something so vivid and real, and my instincts were screaming that I was in great danger. I could not take my eyes off of the red man. Somehow I knew that I should not let it out of my sight. I didn't scream or panic, but I frantically searched for the light switch that I knew was within reach. The red man was standing still, just looking back at me. I don't know why, but I knew that it was completely amused by the situation and how scared that I was. Finally, I turned on the light, and I thought that I was saved. Remember how the light always helped me chase away the shadows? Well, this time, it did not fucking work. It was still there. It was still staring at me, and I could see it more clearly than ever. It began to shift away, getting closer to my friend's bed. Speaking of my friend, of course he woke up from the light that I had just turned on. He turned toward me, asking me what was happening. I think he knew immediately that something was very wrong from the face that I was probably making and my eyes locked on something next to his bed. He kept turning his head toward the red man that I was looking at, but he obviously was not able to see it. My friend kept asking what was wrong again and again, more panicked each time he was inquiring. I was so horrified that my lips were sealed, so I was not able to respond. The whole event took less than a minute to unfold, but here I was, completely terrified and spooking my friend to death. Finally, the red man began to fade away into thin air. During all this time, it did not break eye contact with me. It did not move its arms or its legs. It just kept staring at me with its eyes, with no eyelids, and staring at me with no lips. To this day, I have no explanation for it. It was neither a vivid dream, nor a sleep paralysis, and I know what I saw. To further validate my experience, let me tell you another weird thing I experienced not many years ago related to this story. After forgetting about this horrible nightmare for a decade, I happened to tell the story to my father. I was still very surprised by how vividly I could recall the events of that night, and how I could describe its face precisely. I was in an almost trance-like state while taking a bath after that, still thinking about what had happened. I was recreating the red man's face in my head. I began to stare at my own face in the mirror, a mirror that was at least 2.5 meters away from me. I stared at myself for minutes without really thinking about it, just having the red man's face in mind. Somehow, a feeling of uneasiness began to stir in me. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was at first. I kept staring at my face, in my trance-like state, until I finally realized what was not right with the situation. I was able to see my face. Remember how I told you my eyesight was bad? Well, it did not improve with time. In fact, it got really bad, and without my glasses, I can't see things clearly at all. And here I am, in my bathtub, seeing things clearly for the first time since my toddler years. I got really spooked, and the moment that I realized what was happening, I saw my vision getting blurrier and blurrier. I don't know what to make of the last story. I just wanted to tell you everything that happened to me. I have my own theories, but, again, I do not seek any truth, and I still avoid paranormal things like the plague. Well, that's about it, folks. I hope my experience was interesting to some of you. It was weird and unsettling for me to put words to these events. I feel like every time I mention these things, I put myself closer to the shadows and the red man that still haunt my nightmares to this day. As I said before, I did not experience anything relevant after my teenage years, but the fear of the dark and what it hides is still here. This is by far the spookiest experience my family and I have had regarding the paranormal. I'm currently living in Australia, and this all started when I moved into my current house around 3 years ago. In my culture, we believe that whenever a family moves into a new home, a priest should come to perform various prayers to bless the house. However, when my mom bought the house, we immediately went on holiday for 3 months, so we were unable to perform the rituals. Everything started when we first came back home. Just some background, my mom raised me on her own, so it was just the two of us staying in the house at the time. I was still in high school, and my mom worked in the city, so we both took the train every morning. She always left home earlier than me, so it was my job to lock up each day. She also worked late almost every day, so I would get home first and be home alone for at least 5 hours. One morning as I left home, I began to feel paranoid that I had not locked the door, so I walked back to check it. The door was locked. Later that day, when I came home, I walked up my driveway to find that the door was wide open. I freaked out, but was brave enough to go inside. Our kitchen is pretty close to the entrance, so I grabbed a knife and searched the entire house. There was no one there. I decided to not tell my mom because she was really stressed with work and I didn't want her to freak out too. Over the next few days, another strange thing started to happen. Our garage door would randomly open whenever we were home. My mom was kind of scared, but then we thought maybe our neighbor's garage remote functioned at the same frequency or something and it was activating our door too, so we dismissed it. It had been about 2 months since we were living in our new house and everything seemed to be normal again. Until one day when I was awoken in the middle of the night by my mom. She looked super scared and asked me if I had come into her room to wake her up. I said no, I was half asleep and had no idea what she was rambling on about. She didn't believe me and made me swear that I hadn't. I always play scare pranks on my family, so that was why. I swore I didn't and asked her what was up. She is a super light sleeper, and so while she was sleeping, she heard someone prop her door open. She looked up and saw the figure of a boy and thought it was me. She asked it, "What's wrong?" and blinked. There was nothing there, and her door was still open. She called my name a few times and there was no response, hence why she came to my room. I have to admit, given the stuff happening with the doors, I was kinda scared, but I convinced my mom that she was imagining things and she went back to sleep. Ever since that night, and up to this day, my mom still sleeps with her door open and the living room light on. And I do not blame her after what happened next. 2 weeks after this incident occurred, my mom's best friend and her son and daughter, who were both around my age, came over from our homeland, Malaysia, to visit us. I was really excited as I have always been close to them. One thing you should know about my aunt. She's had many experiences growing up with the paranormal, and so she is super afraid of ghosts. For this reason, me and her kids always used to play pranks on her. One day the 4 of us were playing poker on the dining room table while my mom was taking a nap in the living room. Suddenly my mom rushes out of the living room, her eyes wide open, and she looked terrified. She asked who had woken her up from her nap. The 4 of us were dumbfounded, as we had just been playing cards the entire time. She then told us that she felt someone tap her shoulder while she was asleep. When she opened her eyes, there were 2 feet on the floor. Once again she blinked, and the feet were gone, and there was no one there. My mom was having a full-on breakdown, especially after what had happened the other night. Then my aunt, given how afraid she was of ghosts, started to melt down as well. I didn't want her holiday to be ruined, so I managed to convince them that my mom was probably in the middle of a dream, so when she woke up, she was most likely hallucinating. Yeah, I know, it sounds stupid, but hey, it worked. But then the next day, something else happened. My mom had gone to the shops to get groceries. The kids and I were playing video games in the living room, while their mom was having a shower. Suddenly we hear the bathroom door burst open, and out runs my aunt wrapped in her towel. She screamed at us, telling us to stop trying to scare her, and that it wasn't funny. The 3 of us were extremely confused, and her daughter asked her what had happened. She told us that she knew we were the ones knocking on the bathroom door, even after she told us to stop 3 times. I know it probably seems like she was overreacting, but again, I cannot emphasize her fear of ghosts. I exchanged a concerned look with her kids and then told her that it genuinely was not us and that we were playing FIFA the entire time. Soon my mom got home and we told her what happened also. Let's just say that my aunt started sleeping with her room lights on for the rest of her trip. Soon she and her kids had gone home and it was back to me and my mom again. We returned to our regular routine. My mom was finally at peace and she hadn't seen anything for a while apart from the garage door opening on its own every now and then. The same, however, could not be said for me. It seemed that it had become my turn to be tormented. As I mentioned before, with my mom at work, I would be home alone for a few hours every day. I began to start to hear things. The strange bit is that it would never occur while I was in the living room. Whenever I went to use the toilet or went to sit in my room, I would start hearing things coming from the living room and kitchen. It started out small. Just the sound of some panting, like if you had run a marathon. That kind of panting. But the minute I entered the living room, nothing. There would be no sound at all. It soon started to get worse. I would hear footsteps pacing around outside my room and spoons and pots falling in the kitchen. But every time I step out into the living room again, the noises would stop, and everything would be just as I left it. There was even a time when I thought I heard a kid laughing right outside the door when I was in the toilet. I decided not to tell my mom again because she seemed to be getting over her experiences and I didn't want to scare her all over. But one day I felt that I needed to tell her, and we